We need God. There's so much going on. Shabbos and Sunday was the 19th and 20th of Kislev, and that's such a significant day in the Chabad calendar. I thought to talk about that. We're coming up to Hanukkah. I thought to talk about that. And then my heart just kept pulling me back to Israel. I was like, no, I really want to talk about Israel. I just keep feeling, and I'm sorry if this is what I just feel every week. Like this is our country. This is our people. And as we're learning, the learning itself is for sure creating the energy of the positivity and the trust and the confidence and the miracles we are going to see and are seeing. So many miracles. Before the Sabbath, before the Shabbos, soldiers from Gaza sent out messages and they said, we are here. We can't celebrate the Sabbath. We're in the middle of doing operations, heavy duty operations. No lighting the Shabbos candles for us. No celebrating the Sabbath, the Shabbos for us. So when you light your candles, have us in mind. And this to me was so indicative of the whole energy of this war. We've seen a lot of wars in Israel over the years. This to me is the most spiritual war I've seen, and how our soldiers are focused on tzitzit and the tefillin and having a Torah scroll in Gaza. We see so many pictures of them praying and learning. They're thinking about Shabbos candles. In easier times there, we saw shots of them making the kiddush. And it's just unbelievable. It's just they're all going in such a spiritual, God-centered direction. And I was thinking, and maybe, again, these are just my thoughts, they're so conscious that this is what we need. We need Shabbos. We need tefillin. We need Sefer Torah. You know, when Chabad put up a menorah in Gaza, everyone was so excited. And Chabad printed the Tanya in Gaza. Everyone was so excited. I think maybe because everyone is so raw. Everything is so like ripped open. So maybe that makes it more natural to access God, because normally we're covered up. We all wear a lot of layers. And those layers might be healthy and might be good, or might be barriers between us and what we're feeling inside and us and our relationship with God. And sometimes these very extreme situations that really rip us raw and rip away those barriers, it might go in a very not good direction, or it might, as I think we're seeing, at least in this specific issue of so many people recognizing God, turning to God, wanting God. I'm saying more than any other war I've seen in Israel, maybe because all the layers are gone. And when the layers are gone, what's inside a Jew is a recognition of God, is God. Because inside every Jew is a soul, and that soul is peace of God. A lot of miracles. I share a miracle that resonated with me. You should understand, for every miracle I share, I'm screening through so many that I read or heard or was told, and I'm not sharing. A woman I'm close to, her mother is one of the people that just nonstop. She's a very high level therapist in Israel, and she is just there for the soldiers, totally donating her services, trying her best to heal. She's like a healer therapist. And she says, the miracle stories she's hearing from these soldiers that went through tremendous trauma and tremendous miracles because they're alive and telling her, she can't share a lot of them. She's just writing them down now for a time when she can't share them. So many we're hearing, many I'm filtering out. This one resonated with me, maybe because it's based on a certain trick sometimes men do, or boys, and my sons do it as well. So I was like, oh, I know exactly what they're talking about. My sons do the exact same thing. So what my sons do, what they picked up in yeshiva, in school, is if you have a can of tuna, or not with tuna, my kids do, we have tuna in water. It wouldn't work. They do it with sardines. Have a can of sardines, you want to make it more exciting, you light a match to it. And the match picks up all the oil in the sardines, and the whole thing bursts into fire. And then the fire burns itself out, and you have smoked sardines, which tastes a lot better than normal sardines in a can. Their mother, me, does not let them do that in my house. So they have to go out on the porch and do it. But my boys do this every once in a while. So similarly, in Israel, the soldiers are eating, of course, army rations. Army rations, of course, I think in every army in the world, are pretty inedible. As you probably were aware, or might have been aware, when everybody was drafted, all the reservists came in, all the regular soldiers, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. You might have wondered when you saw all over Israel, people sending them food. It was almost like a joke. They sent out little videos like, help, we're getting really fat, or help, us Sephardim have to eat all this Ashkenaz cooking. But why was everyone sending them food? Because army rations are really bad, and everybody wanted to shower them with love, food, love. So everyone was sending them all this delicious food. Well, now that's fine for when you're practicing. when you're warming up. You're actually in Gaza. They can't send you, their chicken soup or schnitzel. So they're back to army rations, which are really bad. So anyway, that's all the background for the story. So there's a bunch of soldiers in Gaza, and they were sitting down and eating at a certain point in whatever they were doing there. And they had this pretty bad tuna. And the way they make it edible is they do what my boys do with the sardines. They light a match to it and it burns up all the oil and it becomes smoke and tastes better. And one of the soldiers, just like automatic reflex, he lit up his can of tuna, and all the soldiers around him started screaming at him, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? There's live ammunition here. We're not at base. We're on a battlefield. We're in the field. You can't do that. This is so dangerous." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're right." And then, without thinking for a second time in a row, first not thinking to light the tuna, then not thinking, he did what really was very wrong, and he just took this little fiery can now of fire and tuna and metal, and he threw it to get it like out of the live ammunition where all the soldiers throws it. And the soldiers like, but then when he threw it, suddenly there's like a explosion. You hear like this huge noise, and they're looking in that direction, and they see terrorists coming out. The terrorists are coming out with their hands, and they quickly take them. They're like, what happened? And they realize that this was a tunnel, as we keep hearing about these tunnels. And the terrorists were there in the tunnel with all their live ammunition, hearing the soldiers out there and about to attack them. And then this flying fiery can of tuna landed among them, and it ignited their ammunition. So everything burst up, and then they were terrified and lost their heads. Instead of retreating into the tunnel, they actually came out and surrendered. This story resonated so deeply inside of me. It might not resonate inside of you, but I'm going to share why it affected me very deeply, besides the fact that my kids do the same trick. I took it as a lot of reassurance, meaning I don't know what they're planning and plotting. They had a lot of days of a ceasefire to do a lot of planning and plotting, to extend their tunnels, to reinforce their tunnels, to lay booby traps all over Gaza. They had the fuel we were sending them. In the south, there was no flying over to see what was going on. In the north, it was for 6 hours a day. There's another 18 hours. They could do a lot of stuff. And if I let my head go in that direction, it's terrifying, because every soldier is very precious. Every soldier is somebody's husband, somebody's father, somebody's son. And it's very, very terrifying what Hamas could have laid out for them. And I think this story, and again, there are so many like it, just really expresses this point. There's a God. And it really resonated in me, a verse that I never officially took this on as a resolution, but I've just sort of naturally morphed into it since the war began. And I'm going to share what I do and share it with you in case somebody else would also like to take this on. At the end of our prayers, in our morning, afternoon, and evening prayers, whenever you pray, the last prayer we say is the Aleinu prayer. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol. We want to give praise to God. Now, you might say that or you might not. The Aleinu prayer is a paragraph, very powerful paragraph that I'm not going to talk about. After that, there's another paragraph, also very powerful paragraph, all about the redemption and focusing on how the world is going to recognize God. Another very powerful paragraph I'm not going to talk about. After that, there are 4 more lines. So this is the end of the prayers. We have the Aleinu, we praise God. We have Alke Nekave, and therefore we hope for the time of the ultimate redemption. In our first paragraph, we're saying how it's all God and there's nothing but God. And therefore, that flows into the second paragraph. And therefore, there should be a time when the whole world should recognize there's only God. And then after that, we have 4 more lines. And the 4 more lines, the first 3 of the 4, are all verses from various places in the prophets. There's 3 verses. One begins, Altira Pachapisom, don't fear any sudden dread. The second one begins, Utsu Eitza Visufar, they will plot plots and they'll be nullified. And the third one begins, until our old age, God will be with us. These are just the beginning of these lines. Now, these lines are actually very famous in not Hanukkah, coming up in a week, but the holiday we sort of associate with Hanukkah, which is Purim. By Purim, of course, we all know the story of Purim. And we know Haman and Achashverosh, they were a dynamic duo. They both hated us about the same. They both wanted genocide, that word that gets tossed around now. They wanted it, just as some people still want it. And they were very practically trying to implement it. And of course, the Jews were fighting in the way Jews fight then and now, spiritually. And Mordechai didn't know what way it was going to go. Mordechai was the leader of the Jewish people, and he wasn't sure what was going to happen. He knew, again, for spiritual reasons, everything goes back to spirituality. For spiritual reasons, maybe the Jews weren't deserving of the miracle. Of course, he was trying to create these miracles by the Jews' self-sacrifice for God, by the Jews gathering and fasting and prayer and Torah study. All of that was to make the Jews worthy of miracles. But he understood that initially the Jews had, if you remember the story, had sinned, had transgressed, had done things wrong, and that's why they were in the situation. So maybe they weren't deserving of the miracles. So Mordechai wasn't doubting God's powers, but Mordechai was doubting what's going to be. Are the Jews deserving and God's going to make some amazing miracle to save world Jewry? Or maybe the Jews aren't deserving, and then that wouldn't be the ending. That wouldn't be the script. He didn't know what it was going to be. So as he's walking, thinking deeply, what can he do to help save the Jewish people? He encounters 3 children leaving school, leaving yeshiva, leaving their religious school. And he says to each one of them, tell me, give me a verse. Tell me a verse you learned today in school. And the first boy says, the first of the 3 verses I just told you, Al tira b'pachat pisom, don't fear any sudden dread. Continue the verse. The second one said the second verse. The second verse is from Isaiah, from Yeshaya. Utsu etza v'sufar, they will plot against us and it will be nullified. And the third one said the third verse I just told you. Even in our old age, it could be our time of infirmity and weakness, God will always be with us, supporting us, redeeming us, protecting us. When Mordechai heard these 3 boys, in their innocence, each one just quoting one verse they remembered learning today, he's like, okay, God, thanks. It's going to be good. We're going to win. Because these verses reassured him this was a what we call like a minor prophecy, the voices that innocently came out of the mouths of these children, that it's going to be great. All the plots will be nullified. There'll be enormous salvation. And everything that we know happened in the story of Purim, Mordechai might not have known the details, but he knew the broad strokes. He knew it was going to be good. He knew we were going to be saved. So since then, these verses are very special to the Jewish people. And these verses really represent this concept of no matter what's happening in the world, no matter who's trying to destroy us, God's going to save us. God's going to pull us through. And that's why we have them at the very end of our prayers, meaning the last official prayer is the Elena prayer. We praise God with the next paragraph about the redemption. And then we tacked on, like so to speak, to the prayers, these 3 verses, because these verses symbolize all the force in the world try to destroy us, we emerge victorious. Of the 3 verses, the middle one seemingly has a special power. And in the past, at various times when it's been dangerous, when it's been scary, when it hasn't looked so good in the land of Israel and the wars and the nations and the terrorists, that middle verse was the one the Lubavitcher Rebbe would always focus on. And they would sing it very strongly to create enormous victory. So I, without officially taking this on, but sort of naturally, since the war started, when I get to that point in my prayers, I'm at the very end of my prayers, right? And 3 verses from the end of a long prayer session, I say it with a lot of intention. I say it with a lot of focus. I say it with a lot of passion. God, you are doing this. I'm going into this at length because I would like to offer this to everyone else. If you pray in Hebrew, as I know Rachel reads it in Hebrew, I'll say the verse in Hebrew. It's the second to last verse there in that paragraph. Utsu etza v'sufar, dabru davar v'lo yakum, ki imanu el. If you pray in English, verse is, they will plot and it will be nullified. They will speak and it will not happen because God is with us. For everybody that says that anyway in their prayers, it's worthwhile during this time to focus, intend, and say it with a lot of passion and say, God, nothing is going to happen from any of their plots. And boy, are they plotting because God is with us. And if you weren't saying it until now, you can say this at the end of your prayers. Again, whatever you do when you pray in the morning. If you say morning blessing, if you say blessing plus Shema, if you say blessing Shema and Shemona Esrei, whatever you say. It's at the end. So when you get to the end of whatever you say in the morning, just add that line. Utsu etza v'sufar. They will plot and it will be nullified. Nullified. Dabru davar v'lo yakum. They will speak words and it will not happen. Ki imanu kel. Because God is with us. So I if you're wondering the connection and why I started speaking about this, because this story, I said, our flying can of tuna, to me, exactly expresses this point here. These soldiers were clueless. They didn't know there were Hamas terrorists a few feet away. They didn't know that was the opening of a tunnel. They didn't know they had live ammunitions and RGPs and grenades. They didn't know any of that. This soldier did two thoughtless, technically wrong things, two errors of judgment. He lit a fire completely wrong, and then he threw this fire completely wrong. God is with us. God directs his hand both times. And this is the point of the line, and this is the point of the story. We don't know what the plots are. We don't know. A lot of times we hear plots. I mean, with COVID, we heard plots. With the vaccine, we heard plots. Now with the war, we're hearing so many plots and so many scripts and so many things designed to create terror. And guess what? They will plot and it will be nullified. They will speak words and it will not happen because God is with us. Very, very, very powerful, very reassuring, and something we can all add in our prayers to, as we say the words, give them life, give them fervor, give them reality. A different aspect of what's going on as we see in ourselves is a different story. This is a story from October 7th. And I saw the video of the man happened with saying his story. So this is a commander of some unit in the army. And he got a call October 7th, 6 a.m. He went to bed at 4 a.m. himself, so he didn't get woken up by the calls. And then eventually by like 6:30, his wife wakes him up. She said, the phone's been ringing nonstop. They called me to wake you up. And they just say, put on your uniform, he's at home. Take your personal weapon, take your personal ammunition, and go to Sderot. Your group is being called to Sderot. He's like, well, I'm only allowed to have 2 sets of ammunition with me. That's all legally you can have. What am I? He's not at an army base. He's at his apartment. He's at his home. What's going to happen then? And they said, then you'll take more ammunition off the debt. He's like, oh my gosh, what are they talking about? What, again, he has no clue what's going on. It's October 7th, 6:30 in the morning. He went to bed 4. He doesn't know what's going on besides seeing the 20 calls on his phone. But they're so confident there's going to be other dead fighters around that he's just going to grab their guns and grab their ammunition. What is he getting into? And that's exactly what happened. He put on his uniform, which he really needed to. There were other Jews that raced to help, soldiers in the army, reservists, out of the army, regular people, retired policemen. There's so many Jews that raced to help. Most of them did not put on their uniforms, and some of them actually, it was almost got killed because people, when it's really fast and you see someone with a gun, you don't know if he's ours or not ours. So he puts on his uniform, takes out his own personal gun, takes the 2 cases of ammunition, the 2 sets he had with him. That's all he's allowed to have legally. And he races to Sderot and he just sees bodies. Sderot is one of the 3 cities that were attacked. Besides the 22 smaller settlements, there were 3 cities that are very close to Gaza. Sderot is the closest. Sderot is always, for all these years, just getting missiles. And he just saw bodies and bodies, all ages, gender, situations. He never saw, like everyone says, he never saw this before in his life. And his group, gets around him, he and his soldiers, and they're fighting, people falling, and there's so many terrorists, and the soldiers don't even know what to do. He says to them, just hold up your gun and shoot. There's so many terrorists. There's hundreds of them that for sure your bullet's going to hit someone. Like, don't bother aiming. Don't bother looking. Just pick up your gun and just shoot, and then shoot, and then shoot, and then shoot, and then shoot. There are hundreds of terrorists against them. And of course, as he knew was going to happen, they ran out of ammunition. And as they ran out of the ammunition, the terrorists are getting closer and closer and closer. And the shooting, at them is getting louder and louder and louder. And they all know it's the end. They don't have any more ammunition, and there's hundreds of terrorists around. And he happened to be standing right next to a very close friend of his who's also, these are professional army. They're both in the army professionally, and they know it's the end. They have no ammunition. There's hundreds of terrorists getting closer and closer. And this commander, the one who's talking, said about his good friend that, religiously they were on different levels. This commander is probably what we'll call traditional, means he keeps Shabbos to a certain degree, believes in God and does some things. And his friend, he said, is so far that he barbecues on Yom Kippur. Which in Israel, like Yom Kippur, most people have some sense. He has a barbecue on Yom Kippur. He's that far. So here they are, standing together with other soldiers, and soldiers are falling. The terrorists are shooting. The terrorists are getting closer. They know it's the end. There's no other road but the end. And this man standing next to him, the barbecuer of Yom Kippur, he called out suddenly, and the commander said when he heard it, he knew it was from the depths of his being. He said it was such a voice, like from the depths of his being. If we survive, I will keep the Shabbos. I will keep the Sabbath. And the commander said, literally, within 30 seconds of him calling this out, the shooting, instead of getting stronger and stronger and stronger, it started getting a little weaker, a little weaker, a little weaker. Give it a few minutes. It was quiet. The terrorists, they went somewhere else. The men couldn't believe it. Like, there's no terrorists. They all went somewhere. And then they quickly, at that point, they had the ability to search and find more guns and find more weapons and pull themselves together, reconvene and keep fighting. And they fought with them in Sderot, and they fought and they fought and they fought and they fought until they took back control of Sderot. And then, of course, they were not done. There was no end to this long day. And then they won the unit. When Sderot was under control, they were sent to Be'eri, to one of the settlements that was hit the hardest. And they were fighting and fighting and fighting. And there, the commander said he fought straight for 9 hours. 9 hours. And as they were there in Sderot, soldiers fell, soldiers fell, soldiers fell. In Be'eri, more soldiers fell, more soldiers fell, more soldiers fell. But at the end of the 9 hours, when they had control, he and this good friend of his both survived. And about 4 weeks after this horrific October 7th, he was speaking to his friend. And his friend said to him, yeah, I've kept it. It's been 3 Shabbosim, 3 Shabboses since October 7th, and I kept every one. And you think he might continue and say, oh boy, was it hard, but I did it. I gave my word. He didn't say that. You know what he said? I want to do more. I don't just want to keep Shabbos. I want to do more. And seemingly this commander who was speaking also, though I think based on what he was saying, though he didn't really talk about himself, he was really focused on his friend, but it sounded like he was originally like traditional minded. And he has also tremendously committed from being traditional about the Shabbos to actually keeping the Shabbos as well. I thought that point, to me, was the most special part of the whole story. Even more amazing than the original miracle story. Here we have a Jew in the ultimate crisis. There are hundreds of terrorists. You don't even have ammunition left. There's no question how the script is going to end. That a Jew in that situation turns to God, well, that makes sense. That to me is logical. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was in Warsaw when Poland was attacked and very quickly conquered by the Germans, by the Nazis. And he writes, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was in Warsaw. He was actually in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was saved from the Warsaw Ghetto by the German army. But that's a separate story for a different time. But he says there was bombs, and everyone fled into this bomb shelter. And in the bomb shelter were Jews. Primarily, they were all Jews, but Jews of many different types. Very Orthodox Jews, very Hasidic Jews, Jews very, very, very far from anything that had to do with Judaism. And they were all in the same bunker. And the bombs were falling. And obviously, every time a bomb falls, it's terrifying. And then a bomb fell really, really close, like right there. And they all heard the explosion, the boom. And from, the previous Rebbe writes, from the mouths of every Jew in the bunker came out, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is God, God is one. Every single Jew said it exactly the same. The most pious, devout, in synagogue 3 times a day, the one that doesn't even go on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, they all said it the same. Put a Jew in a crisis, and what comes out is belief in God. So the fact that this soldier, who had no seeming relationship or belief in God up to that point, to the degree of how he would violate Yom Kippur, that at that moment of certain death, what came out was belief in God, that's normal. That's a Jew. That makes perfect sense. Of course, the miracle story is that, and 30 seconds later, he saw God's response. Like literally, the commander said, on the watch. Then 30 seconds, suddenly, Instead of getting closer, 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 that's the miracle. That's God's response. That also makes sense. That's what we want, and that makes sense. And there are, thank God, many people that have survived and can tell us the amazing miracles they experienced. But that 4 weeks later, he's still feeling this inspiration, more than inspiration. Does inspiration last 4 weeks? He's doing more, and he wants to do even more. That's amazing. That is so special. And I think that shows something very deep. I think it shows that when a Jew bonds with God, it's so right. It's so natural. It's so organic. It naturally leads to a desire to connect more and connect more and connect more. And hopefully, in far less dramatic situations, we have felt it as well. As we connect, we want to connect more. As we do one thing, we feel a desire to do more. Maybe not immediately, or maybe yes, immediately, but it should be the natural metamorphosis of the Jew, because as we're touching and exposing our core, we just crave more and more and more. Anyone had that experience? You could show me with your virtual hand that as you did, and maybe it was a big stretch, but as you did, you actually felt a desire, not like, whoa, I'm maxed out and this is so difficult, but God, I gave you a commitment, but this feels so right. I want to do more. I want to connect more. I got this piece. I want more. Anyone had that experience for themselves?
Hi, I'd like just to share, not exactly that came to me in the last few days. I remember when I started reading Tehillim many years ago, and it was extremely difficult for me. It was just extremely difficult, and I was like, my whatever ego was against it, and it was, I don't understand the meaning, and it's like, was like so much. And I remember I talked to you about that, and you said, it's okay. Just read it, even if you don't understand. It doesn't matter. Just keep reading and kind of stick to it. And then maybe over time it got easier, and I started actually understand some psalm. And now, when I am dedicating myself to read Tehillim for Israel, for IDF, I just like, I'm so grateful that I didn't give up at that time when it didn't make sense and it was extremely difficult, and that right now I'm in that level that I can do it, and I can read a lot of Tehillim, I can understand, can connect with it, and can, as I believe, protect people in Israel by doing that. So that's kind of like recently that appreciation just kind of like came to my mind, and I just want to share.
That's so beautiful. And I think what Chava's saying is a true road. Not people have different roads, and there's definitely exactly Chava's road of like, oh my gosh, I don't get it, and I don't feel it, and this is difficult, and why am I doing this? And I think there's so many different aspects of serving God. We probably all have different parts of self relating to different aspects. So I could definitely relate to things that also, to me, were hard and difficult. And as Chava said, sometimes it's more quickly, and sometimes it takes a long time, and it just like sometimes we're scrubbing away at a lot of layers till what's us in the core comes out, and we sync with it, and it feels natural, and it feels us, and it feels good. Anyone else can share from their experiences like this in either direction? Okay. Well, I'm going to then continue just briefly. We've got a few more minutes. Something else that happened, I saw with 2 different captives that came out very strongly, which again, I felt also was God giving us a message. So it was 2 different children. One child, Emily Hand, who was an Israeli-Irish girl, a Jewish Israeli-Irish. And she's a child, I think she's 9 years old, maybe 10. And for a long time, they didn't know if she was alive and a hostage or if she was killed. No, the state of Israel did not so quickly determine the number of casualties of October 7th. It takes a long time to find all the bodies, and they're still finding. And so for a long time, they were saying that, we believe her dead. Even at that point, when they thought she was dead, her relatives purchased for her, and something we've discussed several times in this class, a letter in the Torah scroll. As we've said many times, there's a lot of stories that come out in this war of the protection created by those letters. I sure hope everyone here purchased letters for themselves and everyone that they love to give them protection, family and friends. I told you the site that you could go on. It's very easy. So they bought her a letter. When you buy the letter, they don't tell you your letter. They don't. You're buying a letter in Torah scroll. You don't know what letter you got for a very simple reason. Everyone wants to have like the letter in Shema Yisrael or I am God in the Ten Commandments. Nobody wants to have the letters speaking about, murder or gossip or idolatry. So if you started telling people their letter, people would be like, oh, I don't want this letter. I want this letter. What did I get this letter for? So they won't do that, to save problems. They tell you the Torah portion, the Parsha, but they don't tell you which letter it was. And you get a certificate, and they write there the Parsha, the Torah portion your letter in. So for this little Emily, for this little 10-year-old child hostage in Gaza, at that time they didn't even know that she was, but she was hostage in Gaza, they bought her a letter. And the Torah scroll they got back said that her letter is in Parshas Vayetze. That's the Torah portion her letter is found in. And she came out of captivity on Parshas Vayetze. And very similarly, another child, Yagel Yaakov, who was captive for 53 horrific days. And he got out on the 53rd day of his captivity. And his name, Yagel Yaakov, is in Tehillim, is in Psalms, in chapter 53. What's the point of both of these vignettes? Why does God do these things? Like, what do they demonstrate? What is he about? What it's telling us, it's all God. Every single detail. Don't ever forget. Cling to that thought. Take strength, reassurance, comfort, and don't panic with any logical fear based on what's going on now. The Jewish people aren't logical. We're godly. For God, everything is possible. So when you see God like you sometimes say, what did he bother for? God, we appreciate the miracles, like with the tuna can miracle, like this commander and his friends surviving Sderot and Be'eri without any ammunition miracle. Those miracles, we get why you did them. We appreciate it. It saved lives. But that the boy got out on the 53rd day, and his name is in the 53rd chapter of Psalms, that the girl got out on the Torah portion of her letter in the Torah scroll, like that's really like what I'm doing it for. And I think it's just because I don't want you ever to forget God saying, it's all me. Every detail. And yes, the fact that her letter was in that Torah portion did reflect on her coming out. The fact that his name was in chapter 53 did reflect. Torah creates reality. From that letter in the scroll, she was able to get out on Parshas Vayetze. From that 53rd chapter, he got out on the 53rd day. I mean, the story hasn't ended, but there's most of the women and children got out, but not all of them. They're still holding on to 17 of them, saying stories. They don't know where they are, whatever. One of those 17 that did not get out, a 16-year-old girl. Very interesting because there's an organization. If anyone would be interested, I could send them the link or email something to connect them to it. There's an organization that lists all the names of all the hostages and asks people to take on something, some extra good deed per hostage. Take a name and do it for that person. And when I joined, I, like most people do, the way they stack it is first they list all the names that nobody took on yet, and then they list the names that have 1, 2, 3 people that took on. Nobody has like more than 3. It's 240 names. And a lot of the 240, nobody had taken on anything for. So, like probably most people, I just took the first name on the list, Noya Basliana. And I started right away giving charity and saying Psalms for Noya Basliana. And about a week later, I got an email. Oh, we had a computer glitch. And this Noya Basliana, the first name on the list, it kept saying she had 0 things, but actually by now she has 54. And, it just somehow the computer wasn't registering it. So, if you took on Noya Basliana, take on something else, so of course, I assume, and I mean, definitely what I did was, I'm not going to stop doing something for someone. So I kept Noya Basliana and I took on 2 others. Noya Basliana is still not out of Gaza. She's one of those 17 people still not out, 17 women and children still not out of Gaza. She's a 16-year-old girl. She's still not out of Gaza. Every day I checked. I'm like, why wouldn't they let her out? And then they officially said the only women there are soldiers. She's 16 years old. She didn't get out. And then when I got the new updated list of the people that are still hostage, her name is on the list. She's still not out. And then I thought back to this and I'm like, look, I don't know the story. But God knew Noya Basliana needs a lot of help. So there was a computer glitch, a God-ordained computer glitch, and hopefully all 54 people are still doing something for Noya Basliana, who's a 16-year-old girl they're not releasing. And because it's all goes back to God. Again, we could look at it and say, oh, God made it that this boy's name is in the 53rd chapter, he got out the 53rd day, so we should know it's all God. More deeply, he got out the 53rd day because his name's in the 53rd chapter. Again, because it's all from God. Maybe just end with one other little Hanukkah connected thought, and then we'll stop. There was a family of 8 people that were all taken to Gaza. A grandmother, her grandchildren, the husband was killed by Hamas, and the grandmother and her grandchildren were taken. And after about 50 days, they were released. And she asked her son-in-law, who was not hostage, can you go to my house in Be'eri and bring back stuff? Here I am. Obviously, we're not allowed to go there. It's still a very dangerous area, but, you're a man. You can go. Go to my house and salvage whatever you can. Who knows, between all the fighting, who knows what's survived in my house? Take whatever you can and bring it back to me. Now, the men, her son-in-law, didn't want to tell her, but there was no house to go back to. After killing the man, taking the woman, taking the grandchildren captive, they burnt down the entire house. After they took them all hostage. There's nothing left of her house. It's a bunch of ash. He didn't want to tell her this. She just survived 50 days. Her husband's dead. She was 50 days hostage. And by the way, P.S. Oh, they also burnt down your house. So he went to Be'eri hoping he'd find some things, How careful were they in making sure the fire burnt everything? Well, the fire burnt everything. There was nothing left. And he was like, I'm going to come back and say, oops. By the way, you don't have a house either. I mean, I'm obviously going to have to tell her that, but I can't give her anything. So he's just searching and searching through the rubble, through the ash, looking for something. Did nothing survive the fire? And he wasn't finding anything. And he's like just searching and searching and searching. And he found 2 menorahs. It's a week before Hanukkah. He found 2 menorahs. And it was such a sign for him. Wow, it looked like there was just ash. It looked like there was just rubble. It looked like there was just destruction. The menorahs survived. There's life. It looks like all darkness. There's light. And from the darkness emerges a greater light and a greater light. And of course, ultimately, the light of redemption. And that's what we should see. And that's what we should celebrate. And Hanukkah is coming. And Hanukkah is all about redemption.